Welcome to another edition of Untethered Talks. Recently, I did a second interview with David Knight. David does a talk show and podcast that is often shadow banned or censored by big tech. Primarily, he talks about the elite entities of the world and exposes their plans to control us by many subversive strategies. Since he has been paying attention to their schemes for decades, I think he has great insight that helps make some sense of what's going on. So without further ado, let's dig in. Want to go ahead and introduce my special guest. His name is David Knight. He has been paying attention for a long time. I learned a lot from his show, and especially a lot about the upcoming events leading up to 2030 and kind of what to do to be prepared. So I think he has valuable insight. He's been looking into the worldwide elite plans for a long time. And so I think he's going to be very valuable to talk to. And he's an awesome guy, a great friend, and very talented from what I hear. I've gathered over time that you're a big fan of Monty Python.
Yeah,
Which skits
right.
do you like better, the Argument Clinic or the Ministry of Silly Walks?
I think the argument clinic. It's more verbal, and I think it's kind of sad to look at the Ministry of Silly Walks now, knowing that John Cleese has had so many hip replacement, knee replacement, and all the rest of the stuff. He probably does have a silly walk for real now. I guess I don't know. Age catches up to all of us.
Um, okay, and following up on that question, can you tell me what is the airspeed velocity of an unladen swallow?
Laden or unladen? That's where you fly into the.
I don't know that. Ah!
That's right. Yeah.
I thought I'd have some humor to this one. I'd ask some dumb questions first off.
None shall pass.
I knew you were going to get that, by the way, so that's why
Yeah. One of my favorite Monty Python things is Brazil. Unfortunately, I find myself living it on a daily basis now.
That is one that I haven't watched, actually. I heard you talk about it, and it sounds pretty crazy. Is it actually comedy, or is it kind of more like a drama?
It's a very dark comedy. There's funny aspects in it, but and when it first came out in 1984, it was kind of Terry Gilliam, the American illustrator who worked with Monty Python. It was his kind of a funny take on authoritarianism and dystopian authoritarian society. But he got so many things right. The fact that it was just ruthless and deadly, but it was also comedic in the sense that things didn't work right, and that's the way it always is in totalitarian societies. They can't get anything to work because everything is centrally controlled, and it just causes everything to break down, as we're now seeing in our supply chains and everything else. So that type of thing is when it came out, I thought it was really funny. And when it came out in 1984, the beginning scene that they have with a over-the-top no-knock raid against an innocent person that they have a mistaken identity with. You look at that and it's like, wow, that's a real exaggeration. It's not an exaggeration anymore. As a matter of fact, the no-knock raids we have for real, in many cases, are much worse than what you see presented there. So what we've seen is over the years, and it's happening so rapidly now, that satire from Babylon Bee and other people is rapidly being caught up with and outpaced by reality. It doesn't take very long at all for it to happen.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. It just struck me. I mean, did they pick 1984 to do that movie on purpose?
Yeah, I think so. It's very much his take on 1984.
So he was a big George Orwell person then, Terry Gilliam?
Yeah, I think he's got a big, he's kind of, as all of them are, leftist, a lot of leftist leanings, but they're from a lot of the old school leftists who didn't like authoritarianism. They didn't realize that it was going to take them to authoritarianism, I believe. But like a lot of them now, they have pushed back. I mean, Terry Gilliam has pushed back against all the political correctness. So has John Cleese. So has Rowan Atkinson. They realize it's not just the end of comedy; it's the end of civilization and society as well.
Yeah, definitely. I've heard that you're a musician. What instruments do you play?
Well, now it's just kind of a hobby. I play keyboards, and I used to play sax, but I haven't played sax in about 50 years since I got out of college. So I don't. I just play keyboards now. But since uh, uh, we've had technology be able to do very good samples on keyboard, it's possible to play pretty passable instruments, from individual instruments to orchestras and things like that. It's a little bit harder to play something that is, if you got a percussion instrument, you got a keyboard, or you got a percussion instrument. That's what a piano is a percussion instrument. So it's pretty easy to do that stuff very convincingly, but it's a little bit harder to do something that is sustained, like wind instruments or strings. And so that requires a little bit more care and practice, try to do that on a keyboard, but it's gotten pretty good. So I do the music that we use in the show. It's one of the reasons why we don't have a larger selection right now. It's because I do the music, and it takes me a while to get that done because I've got other things that I'm working on. But yeah, that's so right now it's just keyboards that I play.
Does one of your sons do the guitar sound in that one little one that you do?
No, everything. I have a son who did whistling on. I did a medley of the Enrico Morricone, the spaghetti westerns, and so we did for a Fistful of Dollars, and that's got a theme that's a whistler. And so had a son who whistled the theme as it is in the original when I did the cover, but all the rest of the instruments I did. And then I went from that to the bridge of The Good, Bad, and the Ugly, and then back to Fistful of Dollars. So we broke that up into a couple of different bumpers that we use.
Okay, well, that's why I thought you guys were really talented, because I thought, put all that together. I thought that was interesting.
Well, thanks.
Okay. Something a little bit more serious, but not too serious.
Okay.
I asked you a question. If you could interview Trump, what would you ask him? And now I want to ask you, if you could interview Biden under oath, what would you ask him?
I would ask him why he is burning down our society. Who's giving him orders is what I would ask him. Because clearly, why do you not relent? You can clearly see that your policies are not working. They're not affecting Putin. As a matter of fact, they've been a bonus for Putin. And so why don't you relent? Can't you see that the only people that are being hurt by this are Americans? And yet you admit that this is a painful transition that you're going to coerce us into. And it just gets deeper and deeper. And I would ask him, is your intention to take us into a world war, into a nuclear war? Because I believe that's what his intention truly is. I believe that's what his orders are.
I'd ask him if he's the big guy that Hunter talks about.
Yeah, exactly. I wouldn't want to ask him any personal questions that come from Hunter's laptop, because I don't really want to talk to him about that. I'll leave that to the showers with his daughter and the porn from his son. I'll let that family work that out within themselves.
Yeah, I don't talk about Hunter Biden in any of my content at all. I think it's just, people talk about it a lot. I understand some of the implications of it, but to me, the only thing interesting about Hunter Biden stuff is that they're possibly in bed with, foreign governments doing things that, so that's the only reason I'd want to know about that, is for that reason. But anyway.
That's right. And that's why you see that type of depravity so much in Washington, is because they're looking for people who are essentially slaves to sin, so they can be slaves to them. They can blackmail them. And so when you look at Hunter is just an example of, in the past, when we didn't have such a depraved society, you could blackmail somebody if they were a married man having an affair. Today, nobody cares. And so the only way that you can blackmail somebody is if they're really into some serious, serious depravity. So we get people like Biden and Trump. That's what we wind up with, because you got to get somebody who is really corrupt and really into strange stuff, so you can blackmail them. But
yeah, well, I'm concerned that within about 5 years, they may totally normalize pedophilia with this whole MAP, minor attracted persons rhetoric that's going on, and with all the grooming that they're doing.
I believe that's the plan. As a matter of fact, if you look at it, there was an article just recently came out. It was on Tablet Magazine, last week, And it was a deep dive into all the many different connections of the Pritzker family. The Pritzker family, they're all billionaires, multi-millionaires, perhaps billionaires, most of them, because of the Hyatt hotel chain. And one of them is governor of Illinois. But then his cousin, who is also part of the Pritzker fortune, is a major mover and shaker. And he's not the only one behind this transgender issue. And so they're funding it in academia. This is far deeper and more perverse than the kinds of stuff we've seen in the past from the McKinsey Institute. It's being funded in the US and Canada by the Pritzker family, many of them. And then, of course, Governor Pritzker is taking the lead in putting a lot of this stuff into a curriculum, and pushing, also funding medical organizations that are doing these types of surgeries. So it definitely is a pedophile agenda. If you can say to the kids at the age of kindergarten can make a determination about their gender, of course, it's implied that they can make intelligent decisions about sexual consent. But beyond that, it's a big connection into transhumanism. A lot of these people who are the big elites that are funding this, when you look at the guy who is one of the co-founders of Sirius Satellite Radio, he was one of the first people to come out as a transgender. And he has been pushing this along with transhumanism, because that is really the next step. The first immediate step, you're right, is pedophilia normalization. But then after that, the transgender stuff and the removal of any objective reality, being able to imagine yourself as something that you aren't, that feeds into the transhumanism, which then feeds into the metaverse. And that's really where they want to ultimately enslave us and entrap us into this fantasy world.
Yeah. You said something about, politicians and sin. I'm going to jump to one of my questions here based on that. I think most reasonable people don't believe that Jeffrey Epstein killed himself. Do you have any insight into how many politicians, or maybe like notable politicians, that might be involved in the U.S. with, I guess, his island and the things that were going on there?
Well, I don't know. I mean, I don't believe that he killed himself, and I don't believe that John McAfee killed himself, and I don't believe that the DC madam killed herself. A lot of people who said, hey, look, I know that I've got some information on some very powerful people that's very damaging to them. I know my life is in danger, but let me just make it clear, I'm not interested in killing myself. And then they were told they suicided themselves after that. So I don't know how many people are, but I'm pretty confident that it includes, we've seen the pictures of Prince Andrew's, of Prince Andrew, and of Bill Gates, of Bill Clinton. It's famous, all the different things that he did. And I would include in that President Trump and Melania. So I feel pretty confident that they're involved in this. There's other famous people who have been in and around with Jeffrey Epstein. It might have just been one plane flight or something, but when there's more than, I could imagine somebody could be fooled with a single plane flight or something like that. But if they hang around this guy multiple times, I think they know what's going on. Trump made these cagey remarks about, he really likes them young and that type of thing. He knows what's going on. He's not a fool. People who want to think that he is going to be the person who's going to save us, and then at the same time to say, but he doesn't know what's going on. Well, if he doesn't know what's going on, how's he going to be your savior? I don't see him as a savior, but I certainly don't see him as an idiot, as a dupe. I think he knows precisely what's going on. So I don't know all the people that are involved in it, but isn't it interesting that nobody is mentioned at all? This judge has eased up her sentence, and I think that is a reward for keeping secret about that. And you watch what happens to the career of this judge. I imagine this judge, who has kept all these people's identities secret, who has not pried into this, and who has been very deferential to Ghislaine Maxwell, I imagine this judge has a very, very bright political future.
Yeah, I agree. Here's an interesting question for you. If you could reduce U.S. military spending, engagements, or presence worldwide, how much would you want to cut or reduce?
How much would I want to cut? Well, the first thing I would do is I would bring the troops home. and I would defund NATO, and I would get out of NATO, because look at what is happening. NATO has been the tip of the spear in terms of pushing us right up to the brink of World War III. They have advisors there. They have escalated the number of troops in Europe. They had a rapid response force used for the first time this year. They've had it there for 20 years, had it there since 2003. This year was the first year they used it. They had 40,000 troops. They've now rapidly upped that to 300,000 troops. As Pat Buchanan has said for many years, if you look at NATO and these other commitments that we have tripwires that are set up all over the world to drag us into any and every conflict. And yet, in this particular case, we are the ones who are taking the initiative. And I say that in spite of Putin invading into Ukraine, because this is something that began in the Obama administration. The connections between the DNC and Ukraine are something that I've talked about for years, going back to the 2016 election. Chalupa there with the DNC, and in Ukraine, the connections with Ukraine and the DNC are just absolutely amazing. And this following the coup that happened during the Obama administration, they were at a complete state of war with these territories that Russia went into. I think Russia made a strategic mistake by going beyond those territories. I think they could have made a case that they were trying to be peacekeepers, but you can't make that case anymore. But that war waged on for 8 years, and nobody cared about it until Russia did something about it. They were content to allow Ukraine to bomb civilian centers, and I think for 8 years. And 5 years after that was in progress, you had one of the guys who is in the Zelensky administration, but I would say Zelensky is in his administration. I think Zelensky is nothing but a know-nothing puppet. He's an actor, literally an actor filling a role. But this guy's name is Arestovich, and he's about the same age or maybe younger than Zelensky. And he gave an interview 3 years ago, and the person who was interviewing asked him, she said, is there a possibility that we can stop this war in Donbass and these other, and Luhansk? And he says, no, absolutely will not. He says, as a matter of fact, it will escalate. And about 2022, we will have a major war with Russia, and this country will be completely destroyed. And she was like, what? You know, nothing can be done. And he goes, no, he says, it's a very cool thing, actually. He said, that will allow us to become part of NATO, and that'll be our price for entry into NATO. He knew exactly what was happening. This is an execution of a plan. And so they're not reacting to Putin. This is proactive. This is planned. This has been planned for a decade by these people. You know, when you look at what is happening with the military, I said at the beginning of the Trump administration, he made promises that he would end the war in Afghanistan, which he didn't. You know, it was a fire drill getting out, that Biden got out, but it was not something that was planned or well executed, and Trump didn't do it the whole time he was there. But he said he would end the wars in Afghanistan, Iraq, and things like that. And I said, fine, just bring the troops home, put them on our border instead of protecting these other borders, supposedly protecting them. You can kill two birds with one stone. We need to have a policy where we have good relations with as many people as we can, and no entangling alliances. That was the original American foreign policy of George Washington, and we need to return to it. It's really very simple, really very simple.
Okay. All right. You and I both know the QAnon movement is a psyop. It's interesting because I know Alex Jones says it is a psyop, but at the early part of it, he kind of mentioned that he somehow knew who this was that was posting. Do you think he was just lying about that, or do you think that he really knew who was posting?
I think he was involved in that. I think he was involved with psyops about the Stop the Steal stuff with Steve Pachinik and others. From the very beginning of all this stuff, Steve Pachinik was coming on his program all the time saying, we're going to put Trump in as, it's the military intelligence as opposed to the CIA and other things, the right wing as opposed to the left wing intelligence community. And so all this stuff was there from the very beginning. That's one of the key things that's being sold out there by QAnon. And long after Alex pulled, and the only reason Alex pulled back was because QAnon started attacking Alex and can't remember his name now. The guy who really rode QAnon to fame. He was our Washington correspondent there for a time. Jerome Corsi. Jerome Corsi really parlayed that into a lot of money and a lot of fame. And then whoever was running QAnon decided they would take him down a notch as well. And so they came after Jerome Corsi, they came after Alex. And at that point, they denounced it. They were all about it and pushing it. And I had Jerome Corsi come on my show since he was working for InfoWars in Washington. I'd have him come on and talk. And I recall when he said around Christmas time, look, we've got these new riddles coming out from Q, and it says, red on or white on red or something like that. So he goes, that means Switzerland. That means that Julian Assange is going to be secretly released and flown to Switzerland. I said, yeah, okay, we'll see about that. And I never had him back on again because I just knew that was nonsense. I knew it was a lie, but Jerome Corsi kept selling that, and he sold a book. He got really big. He made a lot of money off of that. And so did Alex, selling this Stop the Steal stuff with Steve Pachenik. He made a fortune. And the result of that is that you take your own people and you run a psyop on them. And we've seen this whole thing done before. I mean, look at the story of Sidney Riley. Sidney Riley, Ace of Spies. He was involved with a Lockhart plot, to try to overthrow the Bolsheviks and that type of thing. He was the master spy that Ian Fleming had in mind when he wrote James Bond. And even he was fooled and lost his life by a double agent type of operation that was run by Felix Dzerzhinsky out of the Cheka, which was predecessor to the KGB. And what they did was they, in order to draw people in that were opposed to the communists, to the Bolsheviks in Russia, they set up a network of people who were against the Bolshevik, the communist government. They funded it, and they fed these people all this information, and they figured out who they were. They lured them in. They milked them dry of money. And I'm telling you, that's what happened with all the Stop the Steal stuff. That's the real issue, instead of, they've made it about the violence that happened on January the 6th. But that's the real issue, that kind of betrayal of the people who trusted QAnon and Trump and Alex and all the rest of this stuff.
Okay. All righty. Here's an interesting question for you. You did mention in our last interview that you studied the Vegas shooting pretty well.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think there were multiple shooters, or do you think the Saudi government might have been involved with that shooting?
Well, I'm not saying I'm an expert on it. I know, what I looked at the time was there were a lot of things that didn't add up. I mean, you had these guns that they found that had braces on. It's been a while since I've gone back and looked at it, but the things that I recall were that you had these supposedly bump stocks were doing this, and yet the windows were intact, and you had these guns that they were supposedly firing with bump stocks, and they had braces on them as well. There's so many things did not add up. Things did not add up in terms of the police, when they went up there, what they heard and what they saw and what they didn't see. There were reports at the time that there were multiple shooters, that they were exfiltrated. There was suspicious, things about helicopters that were there at the time. I don't know what happened with all of that stuff. I just know that what happened in the aftermath of it was that you had President Trump, for the first time ever, first time that an executive decided that they would do gun control via executive order, and doing it for the bump stock. Everything about that was suspicious. And that part of it has become even more suspicious for me as time has gone on. I thought it was suspicious at the very beginning, and I talked to people who were shot at, and that week. And then at the end of the week, Steve Pachenik came on and tried to sell the idea on my show that nobody died. And it's like, come on, you're not going to sell that here. That was a trick. It was a deception. It was the usual kind of thing that you see these people doing to say that nobody died. There was a lot that was very suspicious of that. And I think the continuum with it ending and the first ever precedent of executive order gun control. And now what's happened in the wake of that, you saw Kamala Harris, when she was running, said, I'm going to give Congress, if I'm elected president, I'll give them 100 days. And if they don't do gun control that I want, I'll do it by executive order. And then we've seen since Biden got in, he's now done 2 executive order gun controls. The first one was over braces, which was not very important, but it was still continuing to establish that as a precedent. And that's the way they do it. They do it with insignificant things like bump stocks and pistol braces so the people don't resist them. And then it becomes more and more significant what they do. Once they establish the idea, hey, look, I've done this with several different things now. I've just by executive order, I've done gun control. So I can do it on something that's very substantive. And now I'm just going to say you can't have an AR-15. That's the way this thing is going to roll out. And so I think that is the most significant thing to come out of the Vegas shooting. That and the fact that, the CIA agent Pachinik tried to set me up. But
that Pachinik, he's a sneaky fellow, isn't he?
He's a snake.
He's a man.
He's a
snake.
snake.
When I started to hear what you had to say about that, he had said things that caught my attention in the past, and I think I followed him like a couple years ago on Twitter because of it. And as soon as I heard you talking about that, I unfollowed him because I'm like, you know what, that's not good.
He's a great storyteller. He's a real raconteur, and that's what they want. To create these deceptive narratives. He's the perfect guy for that. You notice that he's the name that doesn't come up in any of the January 6th committee hearings. Nobody talks about that. He's telling everybody, he pushed this false hope more than anybody, earlier than anybody, and continued to do it on InfoWars, but nobody talks about that. That video that he did 2 days after the election saying that already started arresting people and Trump had set this whole thing up as a sting, and don't worry, we've got everything under control. That video got 4 million views in the first day. InfoWars had never had anything like that on their own site. Even Rush Limbaugh talked about it. And yet there's no questions about that. It's amazing.
Yeah. Have you ever been contacted by a foreign intelligence agency, and did they ever threaten you based on information you share?
No, never have. I mean, the closest I've ever come to anything like that was I did an interview with Alexander Dugin, who surfaced a couple of months ago. There were several articles that came out at the same time calling him Putin's Rasputin, right? And he was an interesting character. I mean, there wasn't anything threatening about it. I talked to him because I was trying to figure out, okay, so is this guy an anti-communist? Is he about, Russian Orthodox religion? He seemed to be about that. But at the same time, he seemed to also love the Bolsheviks. This is part of our history. I'm not going to reject part of our history. It's like, where's this guy coming from? He seems to be all over the map. He has this idea that Russia is, this land power, and that America is a sea power, a continuation of the British Empire, and that we are natural enemies. And the reason that he came into mainstream media a couple of months ago was because he, as well as some other people, some church leaders from the Russian Orthodox Church, were saying at the very beginning of this that this was an existential conflict. In other words, this is a life or death thing for Russia. That's what he was advising Putin and saying to the public. And so because of that, they were talking to him. So I guess that's probably about the most contact I've had with a foreign official. If I had been in London, I would have done my best to try to get a hold of Julian Assange, but I wasn't there during that time. So,
yeah. I've heard you mention that you were part of a group that tried to sue, I guess, Michael Mann for the Inconvenient Truth documentary. Can you give me the name of that group again, and if they were successful in suing anybody else?
We were not successful. The group that I was working for, and actually I was a media fellow, so I was doing videos for them. I would do interviews, and then I would do animation to show what they were talking about. The group at the time was called the American Tradition Institute. That's now become E&E, Environment and Energy, I think is what they call it. They changed the name after I was there, and I've interviewed the guy who was with them. That is kind of the executive of that group now several times. But what we were trying to do, it wasn't about Inconvenient Truth. It was used by Al Gore during Inconvenient Truth. Michael Mann created the fictional hockey stick idea, and if you remember Inconvenient Truth, Al Gore blew up this. So it's a graph. The idea being that you're going to go along and we've got a gradual rise, and all of a sudden it goes exponential. That's what they call the hockey stick. It's just an exponential rise in CO2 emission, and concurrent with that, an exponential rise in temperature. And so at the beginning of the movie, Al Gore blows that chart up to like a billboard size, and for emphasis, he gets onto an electric elevated platform and rises up to show how big this is going to be. Well, the reality is that was all fabricated. Michael Mann was involved in ClimateGate. That was something that came out of the University of East Anglia in the UK. And they were passing emails back and forth saying, our models don't work. How are we going to hide the decline in temperature? You know, we predicted things were going to go up. They're actually going down. How do we manipulate this? How do we deceive people, really? And so that was a very explosive thing. People had sued them for information. They couldn't get the information. It eventually turned up on a Russian server. There were about 1,000 emails. And then the establishment worked very hard to push back against that and say, well, this isn't true. And, cover. And they did a good job of covering up. And then there was another 5,000 as part of ClimateGate Part 2 that showed up about a year or 2 years later. And another 5,000 emails showing how these people were conspiring to manipulate the data. These are people in academia in the UK as well as in the US. Now, Michael Mann was working at the University of Virginia at the time, and he was an employee of the state, and he was doing all this research on, while he was at work, on work computers, while he was being paid by the state there at the University of Virginia. He published his research. His research was used to create public policy, and yet, because his name was involved in this ClimateGate emails, these people who are in the UK were writing stuff to Michael Mann, and he was writing back to them about how they could manipulate the data to hide their failed models. Because he was involved in all of that, the group that I was in sued to get his information, and we wanted to see his data. And so, University of Virginia initially fought it and then said, all right, we'll turn it over to you. And then he got involved. He'd already moved on to University of Pennsylvania. He got involved and said, no, that's my private stuff. It's like, it's not your private stuff. And it is not anything that is proprietary. You've already published the information. It's already been used for public policy. We just want to see your data. It's like, the whole thing about Pfizer and, the data that they wanted to cover up, the FDA data that they wanted to cover up for 75 years. So it's like, you've published all this stuff, show us your data. And he went to court, and he was able to find a judge that said, no, that's his own personal stuff, and he doesn't have to show it to you. And so that's why when I saw this stuff with Pfizer and the FDA and all the rest of this stuff, I knew exactly the game that these people are playing. If they won't show you their data, then they've got something to hide. And it's very clear, very clear. And so, it still remains hidden. And isn't it interesting that these people who have told us that the world was for the first 10 years, 8 to 10 years, the world was going to freeze, from 1970 when they had the first Earth Day, it was going to be a new ice age. Then all of a sudden they did a complete 180 and said, no, we're going to have global warming and the ice caps are going to melt. And yet nothing changed in terms of what we were supposed to do, right? They still wanted all the same things done, even though it went from an ice age to, we're going to melt down. And then they kept the same things when they started doing the pandemic. It was all, whether it's a new ice age or whether all the ice is going to melt or whether it's a virus pandemic, we want you to do the same things or you're all going to die. It's just obvious lies and deceptions that they're doing to support an agenda that never changes. And they just come up with different existential threats.
Were they, I wasn't alive in the 70s. I was born in 1980. Were they suggesting lockdowns in the 70s back then or anything like that?
No, they weren't suggesting lockdowns, but they were suggesting population control, and they were suggesting that we have too many people. That was the key thing, and that has remained one of the key things. And then as you look at this moving through, we're using too many resources, so we got to reduce the resources. We have to have austerity. We have to have rationing. We have to have less population. And then in 2001, 2 months before 9/11, you had the first one of these Germ Games. It was called Dark Winter, and it was run by Johns Hopkins, and you had people like Fauci involved. You had CIA agents like Woolsey that were playing the roles of a president and other people in the administration. So they did this simulation, and in that simulation, that was exactly like what we had in 2020. Exactly. You got to lock everybody down. And they would give them a scenario. They would have them react to it. They had people who were doing news reports, and they were supposedly reacting to the decisions that the people who were participating in the simulation, things that they were doing. And so they would give them feedback in that way. What it really was is one of these RAND Corporation, manipulations where they make you think that you are putting stuff in when they're really manipulating you to make certain statements and decisions. But the bottom line of Dark Winter was they would tell everybody, everyone died because you didn't lock everything down quickly enough, because your measures, you were too afraid that they were too draconian. So everybody died because of that. And everybody died because you didn't rush a vaccine out to them. And they did an annual, at least once a year, they did this type of germ game for the next 20 years. But that year, 2 months before 9/11, they ran that. 1 week after 9/11, they had the anthrax attack, which was a false flag. New York Times, Washington Post points that out. Everybody from mainstream media to the people who are telling you the truth, everybody tells you the truth about the anthrax attacks. And then 2 months after the anthrax attacks, they pushed out Model State Health Emergency Powers Act to get the states to give themselves the powers that they just used against us. So that part of it was there for 20 years. Prior to that, you had we've got to take everything away from you. We got to take away your car. We got to take away your home. You're using too many resources, austerity. We got too many people, depopulation. All of that stuff was there for the preceding 30 years. And if you look at the UN 2030 agenda, if you look at the agenda before that, UN Agenda 21, both of those were pushing the idea that we had to concentrate everybody in the cities and have absolute total surveillance and control of them so that we didn't destroy the world. And so all of these things are converging together.
Yeah, I do agree. Here's a more spiritual question. Do you believe in the rapture of the church? And if you do you believe a post, mid, pre, or some combination of those?
Yes, I do. I think the rapture is clear. I think that's clear whether you are, and of course, there are people who are amillennial. There are people who are millennialists, and the millennialists are broken down into the pre-tribulation, mid-tribulation, post-tribulation, that type of thing. And then you also have post-millennials. And that was the most popular eschatology in the 19th century because things seemed to be getting better. And so everybody believed that we were marching towards a post-millennial where, we're going to usher in a millennial kingdom and Christianity was going to be triumphant. So there's a lot of different ways to look at this. And I'm not dogmatic about it. I don't pretend to know any of these because I've had really good, I've looked at all these different ones, and I find Bible teachers that I can learn a lot from that have completely different takes on all this. And so I know some churches will make this a test of orthodoxy, a test of fellowship. I don't. And so I'm just, I try to be familiar with all these things so that I can recognize whichever one it is that's going to happen. I don't pretend to know when it's going to happen. And I am really, not convinced fully of any of these because I see problems with each and every one of them. And I see that, and I see arguments for each and every one of them from the Bible. So I'm not dogmatic about that. As time goes on, I have to say I grew up in an amillennial church, and which just basically believe that things are going to, continue on, and then Christ is going to come back and create a new heaven, new earth. And yet, I would look at these things. I was familiar with what was said in Revelation, about how everybody would see these two witnesses. The entire world would watch them. They'd be in Jerusalem. They'd be struck down. They'd be raised, in a few days after that. And I thought, and so that was an argument from the people that when I was a child, I would hear them saying, well, obviously this can't really happen because, so this is figurative, right? This is a spiritual thing. And yet that's not even something that we would think twice about anymore. And I've seen, because, when I was a child, you didn't even have satellite TV. I'm so old. How old am I? I am so old that I remember when it was a novelty for people to say live via satellite. We got a live satellite broadcast of something that's happening on the other coast of the, or something that's happening on the other side of the world. And so that was a novelty at the time. And I was hearing this when I was a very young child, that, this is obviously metaphorical. And so the more I look at this, the more things start to look very literal, especially now when you start talking about things like the mark of the beast and other things like that. You start talking about a central bank digital currency, a one world currency that will be far beyond what we've seen with the vaccine passports, where we will have everything that we do monitored, and you will not be able to do anything unless you completely toe the line with the government and do everything they demand. And so when you look at this, it is looking more and more literal as time goes by. So I'm starting to lean towards, to that interpretation, but there's still some things that I don't understand about it. I'll admit that. So.
Great. All right. Here's a big question. It's not very long, but the moon landings, do you think that they fake them, or do you think they're real?
Well, I think that certainly they had a reason to fake them, and I think it's very suspicious, the fact that they abruptly stopped. When I was at InfoWars, there was a guy who was part of mission control there in Houston. He was retired, and he came on many times before he died. And he said, look, I was on the front lines there, and I'm not convinced it's real. And so I thought that was pretty, he says, I'm not convinced it's not. He said there were other things that made me think that it was real. But he said there was a lot of stuff that made me think it was fake. So, you look at this, and isn't it interesting that everything was destroyed? And that's one of the things he said too. He said, and then in addition to that, why did they destroy all the Saturn V boosters and rockets and everything? He said, not only did they destroy the engines, but they destroyed all the blueprints and other stuff like that, right? They just went through and erased it all. Why would they do that if all this stuff were real? And then why didn't we go back for all these years, right? So there's a lot of very, very questionable stuff. And clearly they had a motivation to try to fake that. I'm somewhat skeptical of it. I can't prove it one way or the other.
Okay. All right. I think this is my last question. So,
okay.
All right. So, we talk about 9/11 a lot, but I think one area of 9/11 that doesn't get discussed very much is what happened with the Israeli government on that. Do you have any insight into that, like the dancing Israelis or anything like that?
Clearly, there's a lot of connections, but there's also opposition, with the Israelis. And I think when I look at it, I've had people say, well, what do you think actually took down the buildings? Was it a directed energy weapon? Was it this? Was it that? And so I would rather, when I talk about 9/11, I would like to talk about what we're certain did not happen. And that is the official story. I don't know what method was used to take the buildings down. I know you had 3 buildings come down, only 2 of them were even hit by a plane. And I know, the hole in the Pentagon, too small for the plane to fit in, didn't have the pieces there in the early pictures. And it just happened to hit at one spot where they're investigating trillions of dollars that were missing. So you look at all of this stuff, and it is phony in the extreme. We've had engineers who have gone through and done an analysis and said these buildings would not collapse on their own. We've had pilots saying these planes could not fly that fast at that low altitude where the atmosphere is thicker and things like that. People who flew those planes their entire career, who were flight instructors for those planes, so they can't fly at that speed. So we have all of that. I want to focus on the fact that the government lied to us. And then they used that lie to create a foundation for oppression. And so that's what I want to focus on. I don't have the ability, and this is the way I look at all these different events that I have skepticism about, whether we're talking about Sandy Hook or Vegas or 9/11 or any of these things. I can't prove who did or didn't do it. That's hard enough if you have the powers of government and law enforcement to be able to subpoena people and to be able to go in and physically grab their records. I don't have that kind of capability. And since they hide so much stuff, I can't know with any certainty who did it or how they did it. What I know with certainty is that what the government told us is an absolute lie. It's as much of a lie as the magic bullet that Arlen Specter told us about the JFK assassination, or the single shooter, or the rest of stuff. So when we know what didn't happen, and if we look at that, that gets us a good way to the truth. Because Arthur Conan Doyle, who wrote Sherlock Holmes, when he's talking about deductive reasoning, he said, what you do is you eliminate the impossible. And when you do that, the only thing that's left, no matter how improbable, is the truth. And so that's the way I like to look at it. It's like, well, that couldn't happen. That really couldn't happen. So you're lying to me about that. Why would you lie to me about that? And you're lying to me, and you're using this to alter society and to create structures that are against the Constitution, that are tyrannical, draconian, and are going to have tremendous effects on us. And I think that's really the key thing. If we can push back against that, maybe we can find out the truth later on. But no, I don't trust Israeli intelligence. It's one of the reasons why I don't trust Trump. Look at his connections via Jared Kushner. Look at the situation with Jeffrey Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell. And so when you look at his pardons, you look at Trump's pardons, he didn't do anything for Julian Assange. But look at who he did pardon. A bunch of Israeli spies and a bunch of big, high-profile Israeli crooks that were friends of Jared Kushner. What does that say about Jared Kushner? What does that say about Trump? You can't draw the line and say, well, Kushner is part of the Israeli intelligence, but not Trump. Trump has even come out and said Israel owns Congress, and rightfully so. Rightfully so. How in the world could you say rightfully so about any government that is foreign like that? That's why I call him Benedict Donald, because he is. And so, there's things that we can prove and things we can't prove, but the stuff that is out there is damning enough, I think.
I've seen video footage of the dancing Israelis. They were like young artists. They were going on an Israeli TV show, and they were talking about it. And they basically said they were down there to observe what was going to happen to the Twin Towers. So they made an admission on Israeli TV that they had advanced knowledge of that happening. So that, I think, a lot of people, a huge red flag.
I think a lot of people did. And, I think the BBC knew, and we're working, British intelligence knew, and we're working with them. Israeli intelligence knew, and we're working to make this all happening. I mean, this is a big deal. And again, when we look at, people before what happened in 2020 happened, a lot of people look at this and say, but why would they be using Israeli and British intelligence to pull this thing off in the U.S.? But we look at how this is a global agenda, and you look at how that was part and parcel of this medical dictatorship. The second shoe did not drop until 2020, but it was there at the very beginning, as I said before, dark winter, 2 months before 9/11. And they've been, all of this stuff fits together as a piece, and it's converging together. And you have governments around the world that are conspiring to pull this off. And it's not just the Five Eyes. We have the intelligence services of the English-speaking, New Zealand, Australia, US, Canada, the UK. But, they're working in conjunction with the Israelis and other governments to pull this off. And all the governments were doing the same thing to their people for the last 50 days that we've had this thing going on with the emergency order. So this is a global conspiracy. It involves a lot of governments, and primarily the intelligence agencies of these governments.
Well, man, that's pretty much my list of questions. I always, I'm probably going to have to listen when this interview's over, listen a lot more to your answers and stuff, because I thought there was a lot of great things being put in there. I just need to kind of ponder a bit.
You.
But
I appreciate that.
I think what you offered was very insightful. Hopefully everybody here, everybody that watches this video will think about these things. I think one thing I will mention too is that, you're one of the few that have really been trying to hold Donald Trump to account for things that are going on. I don't like that a lot of people dismiss the vaccine stuff.
Yeah.
And I think
pretty amazing, isn't it?
Yeah, it really is, because that could actually be the biggest killer of humanity ever. We don't know how.
I think so. I think so. And he's still selling it. Yeah,
that to me disgusted me more than anything else. Yeah. Just the fact that that's just been ongoing, and it just seems like, no matter what we say and no matter what point blank questions they've given him, he just acts like, there's nothing to see here. Run along, and just
right.
And he knows better. So,
well, the way I described it is, he created the dumpster fire with the lockdowns and telling people they were non-essential, putting out the vaccines and the rest of the stuff. We already had a dumpster fire with the supply chains and the rest of this. Now Biden has come along, and what he's done is he's dumped our gasoline on top of that dumpster fire. He's made it much bigger and worse, but he's building on the work that Trump did, and that's what it is. Like Ben Garrison had the poster, the left-right march of tyranny. That's the way they operate this thing. They bring in a guy that you think's on your side because they can move the ball that way very, very quickly, and then they bring in the guy that the other side likes, and they can do things with that they'll stand down for. That's just the way that it works.
This is something that I think is interesting to say, but I had a lot of comic relief under Trump's presidency. He just said things that were hilarious so many times, and I just found myself just like, even though, I was getting tired of the stuff. I was getting tired of all the hearings and all the other things. Mm-hmm. He had a lot of funny lines, but I think Joe Biden is equally funny, but for a different reason.
Exactly,
because he says such dumb things, and he's so off, and it's like he's not even trying to be. Trump's trying to be funny. Yeah. Joe Biden isn't even trying to be funny.
Well, these presidents have been puppets for a long time, but there's nobody that's been a clearer puppet than Biden. Even that card that he had, you take your seat and all this guy. I mean, he doesn't know what's going on. He really doesn't.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. Oh, that was absolutely hilarious when I heard that. Anyway, there's a guy called the Doctor of Common Sense, E.T. Williams. His video on that was hilarious. I don't know if you know who that is.
No, I haven't seen that.
He was. Oh yeah, but no, I thought Joe Biden, like, just, it's just amazing to me.
Yeah.
He's like Weekend at Bernie's, man. It's like somebody is literally puppeteering him.
Yeah, he's still breathing, but that's about it.
Remember, like, when he said, like, you can describe the U.S. in one word. Love kind of like.
Lost his train of thought that quickly.
Total build up right there, and he starts to go on. Anyway,
that's right. He's not there anymore.
Yeah, well, oh man, I really enjoyed this interview even more than the first one. Can you just share with people how to find you if they don't already know who you are?
You can find the links to the show at thedavidknightshow.com. That's our website. There's not really much there except links to where you can find the podcast. The podcast is most places where you'll find it, and you'll find the podcast under two different names. You'll find it under The David Knight Show and The Real David Knight Show. At first, we couldn't get my name back from Alex after he fired me. But then we got it. So we just kept both of those going because it took us a couple of months to get that back in some places. But we have links there where you can find the show. We put it up as a video format. We do the show live every day, Monday through Friday, for 3 hours. We have interviews and other things like that we cut out of the show separately. We'll do some shorter cuts that'll go anywhere from 2 minutes to 20 minutes that we put up on the video platforms where we are, and you'll find the links to those video platforms. We put the full show up as a podcast and as a video, and then the video links. And then there's places there where you can support us if you want to, but that's the place where you'll find the links to all the show is all the places where you can find the show. And that is at thedavidknightshow.com.
Just don't look him up on Google. I can tell you that.
Oh, you won't find me on Google. You won't find me on YouTube. I've been kicked off of YouTube, I think, since we talked. I was kicked off. I had put on talking about music. I had done
Yeah.
about 7 or 8 music things, and they'd kicked me off so many times for politics and for pandemic stuff and everything that I just set up a thing and put nothing but music up. And then they completely shut down my channel of music without any warning after 6 months. I mean, they're after me personally. It's not my content; it's me personally. They purged me off of Google, purged me off of YouTube, and it just shows you who's really running Google. You know, the dark state there. They call it the deep state. I think dark state is a better term for them. But anyway, you'll find me at thedavidknightshow.com.
Yeah. One thing, for the future, I don't know how hard this is to do, but you have so many great articles you reference in your shows. In the future, is there any way to put those somewhere in your site for people to share them?
We may do that. We're in the process of trying to change our website so we can sell some merchandise, T-shirts and mugs like that some people have requested to help raise money too. And we talked about turning it into a news aggregation site type of thing, because I've got a lot of articles that I put up. And I actually did put up the articles one day on Subscribestar for the subscribers and said, let me know if you find this to be useful. And I didn't get any positive feedback from that. So I figured there wasn't any interest in that. So there might be some interest in it. In the past, I used to do one article that we focused on, some topic that I had covered during the 3-hour show. I'd like to try to do that, do some more articles, but right now we've got our hands full with the 3-hour show that we're doing. And we also have a show on Rockfin that is for paid subscribers on Saturdays. So we do that as well. But the show is available for free on Rockfin, but you'll see all the different links to all the places where you can get the live broadcast as well as the video archives and the audio podcast. You'll see all that stuff at thedavidknightshow.com.
Yeah, and if you look up on Google, like under your name, it comes up on like a race car driver named David Knight. That's what I noticed a lot. I was trying to look you up that way. It was actually hard to find images of you too, So
Google has become a search engine designed to hide things, and one of the things they want to hide is me. So I've got better visibility on other search engines, but not on Google. And people really ought to start thinking about not using Google, because there's a lot of other search engines that are out there. Brave is getting better. The Brave browser is good in terms of privacy and things like that. DuckDuckGo was trying to sell itself as, privacy and things like that, but they've been, subsumed by Google as well. So I would say check out Brave.
I've honestly have not. I thought Yahoo was doing better than a lot of them for a while, but now I'm starting to feel like everybody is starting to they give you the same results when you look it up. I don't know if they've just got like some kind of a search engine optimization that they do for all the establishment people or what. I don't know.
That's why it's important for people to go back to the earlier days of going directly to a website. And so, I don't typically, if I do searches, I don't use Google search engine, but I've got news websites that I like to, a bunch of them. I go to all the mainstream media news sites, and I go to a bunch of other sites that are independent and, do my own research. But, you have to, if you've got something that you think is a good site, go there on a regular basis instead of, waiting for stuff to be served to you by YouTube or something like that.
So there are a couple of sites that you recommend briefly, like just maybe 4 or 5 that you think are great sources for your show?
I like Zero Hedge has got a good mixture of a lot of different things. I like LifeSite News because they look at, even though they're a Catholic site and I'm not a Catholic, they look at a lot of the intersection between Christianity and moral issues. I like sites, even though I don't necessarily agree with them. Futurism, Wired Magazine, they're good sources for the other side and what the technocracy is pushing. So a lot of times it's important to look at, Drudge has become a great news aggregator for the people that we oppose. So, it's very easy to go there and figure out what agenda they're pushing at a given time. So that type of thing, even though Matt has changed completely, he's still serving a very useful purpose because he's telling us what the opposition thinks.
All right, man. Well, such a pleasure to talk to you again. I am so grateful that I got this opportunity. Congratulations on the move to Tennessee.
Thank you.
I hope one of these days I'll get to see pictures of your family or something. I don't know, man. I'm very curious about what they look like.
We have my son Travis, who has started. First, he started talking a little bit. Now he is coming on to video camera and talking a little bit. So we're going to try.
Travis
to get him.
has a great voice, actually. I think he should do that.
He does, and he's a great mimic as well. And he really gets it. So I've been encouraging him to participate. And but then we have others who don't want to get involved and work behind the scenes, and they would like to, keep their privacy. And I understand that as well. So that's everybody's decision. They get to make on their own.
Having you on my show means a lot. I really, really appreciate it. So,
well, thanks. I appreciate you having me on. Thank you. Happy to do it.
All right, brother. I appreciate you.
Hey guys, thanks for joining me today. Please don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, and share the video with friends and family. You can follow me on Facebook at Untethered Truth Prevails. You can also find me on Twitter at Untethered Vince. If you'd like to give to me financially, you can go to Patreon, and you can find me there at Untethered Creations. I'm also on Venmo, and you can find me if you go to Vince-Barton-1. Once again, I really appreciate you all for joining me, and I wish you good success in the pursuit of truth. Grace and peace to you all.